Squad version 6 is here, and so is the Infantry Combat Overhaul. We've talked a lot about the playtest and the mechanics featured in the Infantry Combat Overhaul, as well as how these changes are going to affect how Squad is played. So in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about version 6, some of the updates that come along with it, and of course, our impressions of ICO as it's released into the live version of Squad. So be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below with your thoughts. How are the games going? And let's get to it. First and foremost, ICO is meant to give a few things. Listed by OWI, it is to increase the amount of teamwork needed to win a fight, create more meaningful trade-offs between different factions, weapon types, and optic types, keep the game fun while making it approachable for new and existing players, and mitigate the amount of punishment newer players experience in combat while learning the game. By now, we're probably all pretty aware of the changes made to the infantry combat that affect the game so drastically, including altering how suppression operates, picture-in-picture scopes, gunplay changes, and infantry movement changes. We've been tracking these changes for the last couple months through the playtests, and we've seen a variety of these changes be both positive and negative. I think there's been benefits to certain things and some frustration shared by the community on other things. But we'll circle back to that in a minute. Let's talk about some of the other changes incorporated in this update. I'll include the release notes down below in the description, but what you'll find is a series of layer changes, tweaks to vehicles incorporated on different layers. There's also a series of bug fixes, many focused on the general gameplay experience and many tweaks to in-game experiences. There's a couple focused on just improving getting into a server, like the server queue getting stuck when a server changes map, also some addressing the running man bug, as we all know it. But there are some additional gameplay updates, not a ton, but there's a few significant ones. For starters, we now have a visual indicator in your squad list to show you who of your squad is within your local voice chat range. Another big change is that name tags will only appear in direct line of sight, meaning you won't see a friendly name tag through a wall. Now, to my understanding, this is not tied to a known issue with the update that OWI has talked about, where basically name tags aren't showing up through the scope. It appears that they had issues with the alignment of the name tag over a player when you're looking through your scope, so they're working on a fix. But right now I can tell you this is leading to some extra TKs because people just don't know camos. OWI has continued to keep the prioritize clarity in scopes and prioritize anti-aliasing in scopes options available as they work through some additional issues with the update. And something to keep in mind is that there is the option to control the frame rate that your scope operates at. I have found better performance by choosing to limit that frame rate to something like 120 or 60 versus leaving it on unlimited. I saw an improvement of 10 to 20 frames when I made this adjustment, specifically when ADSing. Embedded into the playtest, we already saw a lot of changes to kits, so there may be differences in kits that you used to run compared to what you're going to have now in terms of your loadout. Much of this was based on authenticity, so I would really recommend checking out what your loadouts are to see if things have changed from what you're accustomed to. So let's talk about ICO being implemented into our live version of Squad. I think you'll see a lot of similarities from some of the most recent playtests. Given the timeline, I don't think there's anything that has drastically changed from those last couple of playtests. It's just now we're playing it all the time. This is the new version of Squad, and yes, it drastically changes how the game operates. And as expected, there's a variety of opinions as to whether this is the direction Squad should be going in. Well, here's my take. I think if you're making a judgment on whether or not you're going to play Squad moving forward simply because of the first several days of these implemented changes, then you may be judging it way too early. Now, we can disagree on what mechanics work or what mechanics don't work for the game. I, for one, typically would like a little bit more stamina and a little bit more character movement speed, especially in those instances where you're just trying to get to an objective, but you're pretty far off because of hab placement or something like that. There are just slower moments in Squad where I tend to want to get there a little bit faster than I now can. But when taking a step back and looking at Squad and how much has changed just in these mechanic adjustments, you're looking at a very different game, not only from an infantry playstyle, but also how the team needs to work together and position themselves for victory. And drawing judgment on the game in the first few days of this update is not a fair look because the games are a mixed bag. And I'm saying that because of a couple of things. A, you have a lot of new players playing right now, or folks that haven't put a lot of hours in recently trying out Squad again. And almost all of us that have been playing Squad are still sort of playing like it's version 5. And that's a lot of muscle memory or just sticking to the things that you know and are comfortable with. But while it's called the Infantry Combat Overhaul, I've said several times that I think this is changing a lot more than just infantry play. It's going to make you rely more heavily on your teamwork. That includes vehicles and other attributes that you have on the battlefield to use at your advantage. Positioning is now significantly more important. There are just things that are heightened. And I will say that my first several hours or several rounds playing, I didn't get the experience that I wanted. A lot of that was me forcing gunfights, forcing opportunities to just use my weapon instead of working at better positioning and understanding how I can best utilize the mechanics to my advantage. And while I haven't mastered it, being able to do it still took me a lot of time. And it's not going to be every round, but there were instances later, several days after the update came out, where I started to feel way more confident about what I was doing. And when I started to feel things out and I understood a little bit more about how I could position myself better based on some of these changes so I'd be ready for gunfights, the experience became very rewarding. So what really needs to change to adapt to these new mechanics? Well, first of all, I think as an infantry player, you're going to have to start doing things more purposefully. I've started to look at stamina differently. I've used it more as a tax on having to reposition, and I use it a lot of times in bursts, especially through cities. I'm just trying to get from cover to cover and trying to maintain about half my stamina bar so that I can be somewhat ready for a gunfight. In terms of a full squad or fire team, you need to start utilizing roles more effectively. You're going to be required to put that machine gunner in a spot to provide suppression. Marksmen are going to be needed to help cover certain positions so that infantry can make maneuvers across fields or open areas. Grenadiers can start putting smoke down to help with pushes. Now, these are all things that we did, but they're more effective now and they have a heightened need. Pretty much every kit feels more useful because of these updates, given certain things that they're good at. But you do really need to lean on what they're good at. You need to lean on the advantages that each kit gives you to use them effectively across any sort of battle you run into. As a squad lead, you need to really be focused on trying to get your squad to work together. This can be a challenge within itself. It doesn't always happen, but man, when it is happening and it's working, it's very effective. Coordinating your fire teams can be a huge leg up as well, because you can have Bravo laying down the suppressive fire while Charlie actually makes the advance. Finding ways to break down your squad with kits and these roles is very, very important in this update. Again, this is nothing new, it's just more important it seems. I do feel like character movement is affecting placement on habs, so if you are in a cell, you need to keep in mind where you're placing your habs and rallies. If they're too far off an objective, you may not be as effective because of the character movement seed and stamina. Whereas if you're too close and the enemy is pushing you and suppressing you, it's going to be really hard to get that hab operating and get infantry in there to really make the difference they need to make. There's greater importance on SLs also coordinating to maneuver soldiers from one place to another, and that's where vehicles have heightened importance. Not only am I talking about light vehicles or transports, but I'm also talking about IFVs. Infantry fighting vehicles have the opportunity to not only pick up guys and move them, they can also lay down really tough suppressive fire on enemy positions to get your infantry closer and to help them in a firefight. So we all know that these things existed prior to version 6. These are not new additions because of the update. However, because of the update, they seem to have greater value, and they can give your team a significant advantage over the opposing team if utilized well. These are changes in the gameplay that I think version 6 is pushing. And you aren't going to see those sort of changes. You're not going to see people adapt to those changes in the first few days. It is going to take time. That learning curve is pretty steep too, because gunfights are more difficult. Attacking is more difficult. I think defense still has a little bit of a buff over attacking. While the first several days and games that I played were not really meeting my expectation, I will say that the longer I played and the more I began to adapt to things and how they are operating now, I felt a lot better about my gameplay experience. I was running into more of those gunfights that felt like they had meaning. I have focused a lot on positioning and trying to work out a different way of attacking. Obviously, you don't want to run the white line between objectives. You don't want to put habs on those white lines either. You need to work around some of the difficulties you may face in gunfights and start to attack things a little bit differently. Running straight onto a defensive position is not ideal. It never has been, and now you're really going to get punished for it. You can't just make up the problems that you might face by running in the moment through the gunfire. Squad is a different game now. It's going to require some different thinking and some different processes put in place, different tactics to be really effective. Squad has always fit within that window between milsim and more casual experiences, let's say Battlefield, but with this, it's obviously pushing it in a little bit more of a serious direction. While the game may still be imperfect and some of the changes may not be what we want them to be or quite where we need them to be, I do think a lot of the legwork is out of the way, and now we're down to refining everything into the best gameplay experience that Squad can offer. Which brings us to the first patch, which is releasing 1 week after version 6 has released. And I'm pretty excited to see this patch, not necessarily because of the contents within it, however that they were releasing a patch so quickly. Which is not only exciting to see, but it's a little bit of a relief because, as we know, it may not be perfect, but OWI is still working to make the appropriate adjustments based on feedback. So while I basically had this video complete to talk about version 6, I'm now amending it to add in patch notes, and to talk a little bit about what we're going to see change-wise. So you're going to see a decreased lateral sway by 10% for all rifles, DMR, snipers, and AT launchers. When using iron sights, you're going to see an increase of ADS speed by 10%, and when using reflex sights, you'll see an increase of 5%. You're also going to see some tweaks to anti-tank weapons, which is probably an effort to help curb the buff that vehicles got with suppression in the form of reducing minimum sway for all shoulder-fired anti-tank weapons and reducing aiming distance of handheld anti-tank weapons. There's a bunch of different tweaks in this patch. One most notable outside of what we've already talked about is probably the reduced global MG and LMG bipod sway, which I'm sure a lot of folks are going to be happy about because this is something I heard several times that this was a little bit of an issue. So not only is this out pretty quickly to help update gameplay and mechanics, you're also seeing some beneficial changes to certain kits. I can imagine that we're going to see a lot more fine-tuning in the future with different patches. I will say that the anti-tank aspect of this is pretty interesting because I do think vehicles got a very significant buff with this update, specifically around suppression and how that operates. It is not unlikely to see IFVs just basically camping habs and being unable to really counter that without folks flanking or coming in from a different position. Now, I don't run a ton of LMG or MG, but I have heard some concerns over how some of that operated, especially when bipoding, because for the most part, those guys running those kits are going to have to be in stationary positions with their bipod out because the gun is very difficult to handle any other way. Now, something that wasn't included on the first graphic that's still helpful for folks to know is that OWI has gone in and tried to standardize starting tickets for map layers. On large maps, you're going to have starting tickets at 300, and on smaller layers, you're going to have 250 tickets to start with. Now, I've got to play a little bit more with this patch to be able to give a good judgment over how I feel about any of these changes. I don't know that I'm going to notice a ton of it because I don't always play with some of those kits, especially like MG and anti-tank. However, I do think that OWI addressing certain changes and making these small tweaks, these refinements in terms of what version 6 had to offer, is a good sight to see. I'd almost argue that this is more important than the changes themselves. Now, obviously, we've talked a lot about my initial impressions and some of the things that I've gathered while playing my first, week or so in the update. I do think there's still plenty of things that OWI can do to polish this out. Optimization is one of the big key things. If that gets tweaked and we start to see a little bit better performance, I think it'll improve everyone's experience across the board, especially when ADSing, because that's where I'm seeing the most drop off. There are times too when I pull up the ADS or I'm doing something through the scope and I get a lot of the barrel, the interior barrel of the scope, that I wish would be a little bit reduced because of the blur around the scope. I wish instead of seeing a pure black image that it would give me some sort of fuzzy appearance or something, or I just wish there was a way to still have some sort of imagery through the scope without it being fully blocked off with a black frame, because that just makes it feel like a little bit disconnected from the character. And I'll offer this: if you're looking for advice on how to move forward with playing squad, I would really suggest to take your time and to focus on how to make actions and things that you're doing in the game feel like there's more purpose behind them. Utilize your kits to the advantages that they give you, and I think you'll see a better experience. Utilizing vehicles has been a big bonus to me. I've talked about that a little bit, but using something like just a Humvee or whatever to position and working in slightly different routes than running right at a defense that's just sitting in a tower has paid dividends to the experience overall. And don't forget, it's going to take a while for the average squad player and mini squad players to fully adjust and figure out where their new place is amongst version 6 and how it operates. I'm pretty excited to see folks adapt to this because I do think firefights are going to be really wild when people really understand how to utilize the things that come with this update to the best of their ability. I do think there's an opportunity for Squad to continue to grow and to evolve into the game that OWI is shaping it to be. It, to me, is still one of the better experiences in terms of a first-person shooter that utilizes all the main mechanics that they want to feature, like communication and teamwork. But I'd love to hear from all of you, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Again, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and I will see you all next time. Take care.